Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you, the learner, have shared and, well, we dive deep, pulling out the most crucial bits.
That's the plan.
Today, we're digging into Dr. Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife, or at least some key excerpts from it.
And it's quite a story. We're talking about a Harvard neurosurgeon, someone really grounded in science.
Right, who then has this incredibly intense near-death experience during a coma caused by a super rare meningitis.
Yeah, bacterial meningitis, E. coli of all things.
So our mission here is to unpack his journey, look at the insights he claims to have gained, especially the ones that really, push against the standard view of the brain and consciousness. Hopefully it sparks some aha moments for you listeners.
Definitely. And one thing that jumps out right away is this connection he felt, even early in life, to something, well, beyond the everyday.
Yeah, he talks about being fascinated by flight as a kid, airplanes, rockets.
But it wasn't just a kid liking planes, was it? He calls it a homesickness for the skies. There's a real yearning there.
Almost a spiritual thing even then. And he acted on it. Saved up his own money, learned to fly sailplanes when he was just 14.
Imagine that. He describes that feeling up there, alone and free. Said it hit him way deeper than stuff on the ground.
And it stuck with him. He got into sport skydiving in college. You kind of wonder if those feelings, that perspective from way up high, maybe prepped him somehow.
That's an interesting thought. Does it connect to what happened later? And that skydiving passion becomes really relevant when he tells this one story.
Oh, the near miss.
Yeah, near Roanoke Rapids.
Yeah.
6-man star formation, sunset, 7,500 feet up.
Sounds intense already.
He's diving headfirst to catch up, twilight setting in, and suddenly, bam, another guy's pilot chute pops open right underneath him.
Whoa. Milliseconds from disaster.
Totally. And he says it wasn't just reflex. He felt like another much deeper part of me took over, saved him. And he connects that feeling back to the childhood homesickness for the skies.
It really makes you think about instinct, intuition, that stuff that feels deeper than just learned responses, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Now, to really get the impact of his coma experience, you need to understand where he was coming from, scientifically speaking. This guy was no lightweight.
Not at all. Degrees from UNC Chapel Hill, Duke Med, research in neuroendocrinology, cerebral vasospasm.
He did a fellowship in the UK, spent 15 years on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. I mean, this is a top-tier brain scientist.
And a practicing neurosurgeon. He wasn't just studying the brain in theory, he was working on it, developing advanced stuff like stereotactic radiosurgery, MRI-guided procedures.
Exactly. He knew the brain inside and out, literally. And his view of consciousness back then.
Pretty standard scientific materialism, right? He thought consciousness was purely a product of brain activity.
Yeah, he uses that analogy of a TV set. The brain's the hardware. Consciousness is the picture. If the hardware breaks or turns off,
the picture disappears. End of story. That was his model.
Which makes what happened next just mind-blowing from his perspective.
The illness itself, it hit him like a ton of bricks, didn't it? Sudden, intense headache.
Followed by a grand mal seizure. Just completely out of the blue.
And thank goodness for his wife, Holly. She saw how bad it was and called 911, even though he was apparently trying to brush it off initially.
That quick thinking probably saved his life right there.
Mm-hmm.
He gets to Lynchburg General Hospital, and he's in status epilepticus, nonstop seizures.
So the medical team is scrambling, trying to figure out what's going on. Could be withdrawal, overdose, stroke, tumor, or infection like meningitis.
And then they find it. The lab results come back. It's bacterial meningitis, but caused by E. coli.
Which is just incredibly weird in an adult with no obvious risk factors. How rare is that?
Like less than 1 in 10 million adults per year. For this kind of spontaneous case, it's astronomically rare.
Because E. coli lives in the gut, right? It shouldn't really be able to get into the cerebrospinal fluid unless there's like a skull fracture or recent brain surgery or something.
Exactly. And he knew this. He'd done hundreds of spinal taps and brain surgeries himself. He understood just how improbable this was.
And the numbers looked awful. His spinal fluid glucose was down to 1 milligidel. Normal is like 80.
Right. Glucose is brain fuel. So basically, his brain was starving under immense stress. His Apache 2 score, which measures severity of illness, was 18, really high.
Indicating maybe a 30% risk of dying just during the hospitalization. But giving the specific E. coli diagnosis and how fast things were going downhill.
His doctors gave him maybe a 10% chance of survival, at best. Probably with severe neurological damage if he did survive.
And in the middle of all that chaos in the ER, right before he slips into the coma, he shouts out, "God help me."
Yeah. The man of science facing the abyss. It's a powerful moment.
And then nothing. 7 days in a deep coma. But inside, he says, it was anything but nothing. He describes these incredibly vivid experiences, starting where?
He talks about being in a realm of clouds first, fluffy pinkish white clouds against a deep blue-black sky. And then from there, moving into what he calls the core, a place of perfect inky blackness.
Sounds potentially scary, but he didn't experience it that way.
Not at all. He said it was filled with this overwhelming, infinite, unconditional love. Like the darkness itself was love. Comforting. Fundamental.
Wow. And he wasn't alone there.
No, he describes encountering beings, shimmering beings, angelic, leaving these long, streaming trails behind them. And he specifically mentions a beautiful young woman as a companion.
A companion on a butterfly's wing? That's the image he uses, right?
That's the one. Traveling together through this vibrant, ultra-real landscape on the wing of a butterfly. The imagery is just extraordinary.
And his sense of time was different.
Completely gone or irrelevant. He talks about experiencing time all at once, not linearly, and communication wasn't through words.
How did it work then?
Direct knowing. Like thoughts, concepts, emotions transferred instantly without needing language. Pure understanding.
That's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is.
Yeah.
And maybe the biggest takeaway from that realm was this feeling, this knowing of complete interconnectedness, that love is the absolute basis of everything.
He even touches on evil, doesn't he?
Yeah, but sees it as a tiny, almost necessary part of the universe, something that allows for free will, but ultimately it's completely dwarfed by the power and presence of love.
Okay, so he's having this incredibly profound, universe-altering experience. And then after 7 days,
he starts to wake up, which just stunned the doctors, given how long and deep the coma was and the underlying cause.
But it wasn't like flipping a switch back to normal, right?
Yeah.
The return was messy.
Very messy. He describes this initial period of wild delusions, really bizarre stuff.
Like reliving skydiving jumps.
Yeah, and being obsessed with internet messages he thought he needed to decipher. Classic ICU psychosis, probably. Extreme confusion, disorientation.
The brain trying to reboot after massive trauma.
Exactly. Paranoia, vivid fantasies. He tells us one story about thinking he was mixed up in some weirdness at a South Florida cancer clinic with outdoor escalators, ninjas.
Wow. Just shows how scrambled things were initially.
Definitely. But then, gradually, things started to clear.
Slowly, the real world started filtering back in. Language came back. Memories. Recognizing people.
Although, interestingly, he says he felt fine internally, like completely well, even while everyone else was obviously worried about permanent brain damage.
Which must have been strange, that disconnect between inner feeling and outer reality.
And this is where the real conflict starts for him, isn't it?
Yeah.
The collision between his experience and his scientific training.
Yeah. How does a neurosurgeon who believed consciousness is brain activity make sense of having these rich, complex, seemingly real experiences while his neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, was, by all medical accounts, devastated by infection and basically offline?
That's the multi-million-dollar question. His entire worldview was shattered.
And his son, Eben IV, gave him some really crucial advice then.
Yeah, incredibly wise. Told him, write it all down now, every detail you remember before you start reading about NDEs or quantum physics or anything else. Get your raw experience documented first.
Preserve the data, essentially.
Right. And Dr. Alexander felt this really strong pull to share what happened, thinking maybe it could help other people, which led him to start looking into the NDE literature.
And what did he find? Was his experience totally unique?
In terms of the medical context, the severe E. coli meningitis, the documented neocortical shutdown may be unique, yeah. But the content of the experience,
Not so much.
no. He realized tons of people across cultures, across history, have reported incredibly similar things.
Common themes started popping up.
Definitely. Like passing through a darkness or a tunnel towards a brilliant light, encountering beings, sometimes deceased relatives, sometimes figures of light, time and space feeling totally different. That overwhelming feeling of peace and love, getting knowledge directly.
All these elements resonated with what he'd experienced.
Right. But the sticking point for him, scientifically, remained the state of his brain. How could such a complex, coherent experience happen with the neocortex essentially out of commission?
Because most NDEs happen during, say, cardiac arrest, where maybe there's still some residual brain activity or it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
His was prolonged, severe infection.
Exactly. It made it much harder, in his view, to just chalk it up to the brain sputtering out its last signals.
Which brings us to the standard scientific explanations people usually offer for NDEs.
Right, things like lack of oxygen to the brain, surges of endorphins or other chemicals, maybe drug effects from anesthesia or medication.
Or REM intrusion, like dreaming while awake.
Yeah, or temporal lobe seizures. People have proposed various neurological mechanisms, and Dr. Alexander, being a neuroscientist, knew all these hypotheses.
But he felt they didn't fit his specific case.
He argues they fall short, mainly because they usually require a functioning, or at least partially functioning, neocortex. For example, the idea that a surge of DMT, a natural psychedelic, causes NDEs.
He asks, how could DMT create such a rich experience if the brain structures it acts on were basically incapacitated by the meningitis?
That's his central challenge to those explanations. He feels the sheer depth, clarity, and coherence of his experience, combined with the profound dysfunction of his brain, points towards something beyond conventional neuroscience.
It really highlights the hard problem of consciousness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does subjective experience arise from physical matter? Science doesn't fully have a grip on that yet.
Not even close, many would argue. Now, moving a bit away from the pure science, another huge theme in his story is love and connection. It's woven all through it.
Yeah, he talks about reconnecting with his biological family shortly before he got sick. He was adopted, and finding them started healing this old wound, this feeling of being less than fully wanted.
That vulnerability is really powerful. And then, during the coma itself, the impact of his adoptive family, his friends.
Their love, their prayers. He felt he could sense that presence, that support, even when he was totally unresponsive physically.
It suggests those bonds might operate on a level we don't fully understand.
And then the moment with the photograph.
Ah, yes. Seeing the photo of his biological sister, Betsy, who had passed away, and having the sudden, stunning realization
That the companion on the butterfly wing, the beautiful guide.
might have been her. He describes Betsy as a real angel in life, despite struggles, including with alcohol, which mirrored some of his own past issues.
It's like that encounter in the NDE gave him this deep, undeniable sense of being loved, accepted completely, healing that old suspicion he carried.
A profound sense of connection transcending life and death, it seems.
So all of this, the experience itself, the inability to explain it conventionally, the sense of love, it fundamentally changed his whole perspective, right?
Really, he went from believing the brain creates consciousness to believing consciousness is fundamental, primary, that the brain is more like a receiver or a filter, perhaps.
Allowing consciousness to manifest in the physical world, but not being the source of it.
Exactly. He started seeing the physical universe as just one aspect of a much larger reality, a reality grounded in consciousness and love. He talks about the importance of belief and how a strictly materialistic science might be missing a huge part of the picture.
It echoes that philosophical, hard problem again.
It really does. Now, there was one lingering puzzle for him, wasn't there? Something he called his final dilemma.
Right. He was initially bothered that he hadn't encountered his adoptive father during the NDE. They were very close, and his father had also passed away.
That absence felt wrong to him, somehow incomplete.
But then something else happened, involving a poem.
Yeah, a poem called When Tomorrow Starts Without Me. Another patient's family shared it in the hospital. And reading it, it just clicked for him, powerfully, in relation to Betsy, his biological sister.
How so?
The poem speaks from the perspective of someone who has passed on, reassuring loved ones that they're okay, that love connects them still, and combined with seeing Betsy's photo.
He realized she was the guide, the companion. She was the one delivering the message of unconditional love and connection that he most needed to receive at that core level.
Exactly. It resolved that final piece for him. It wasn't about seeing everyone he expected, but receiving the specific message of love he needed, delivered by perhaps the perfect messenger for him in that moment, his sister Betsy.
Wow, what a journey. So wrapping this up, Dr. Alexander's account gives us this just incredibly profound NDE story from someone with deep scientific credentials.
Yeah, and it throws down a real challenge to the standard neuroscientific view of consciousness. He comes away utterly convinced that consciousness isn't confined to the brain.
And that the universe at its core is about love and interconnection.
So for you, the learner, listening to this deep dive into his experience and knowing the acknowledged limits of our current science, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It definitely does. What new questions pop up for you about reality, about consciousness, about our place in this maybe much bigger, more mysterious universe than we usually assume?
Certainly food for thought. Plenty to mull over after considering a story like this.